then we'll get started. If you would please mute yourself at this time, that would be super helpful. Okay. Looks like we have just about everybody in from the waiting room, waiting on one or two more people. So let's get started. Good evening. Welcome to this second resolution hearing. My name is Andrew Walter, and I serve the diocese as canon to the ordinary and chief operating officer. And for tonight, I will also be serving as the moderator. Please do keep yourself muted at all times unless called upon to speak, as that will help the audio for all of us. The purpose of this hearing is to provide all of you with an opportunity to hear briefly from the resolution sponsors and to share any comments or questions you may have about the resolutions. I will start us off in prayer in just a moment, and then we will have up to 30 minutes for each of the resolution this evening. We will first hear from the resolution sponsor, give them an opportunity to introduce their resolution, and then we will open the floor for questions and comments. When we open the floor, if you have a question or comment, if you would please type into the chat, I will call on you in order. And if you hear a question or a comment throughout each session that really resonates with you, or that you agree with, if you would use the raised hand button down in the reactions at the bottom of your screen, that gives us a sense of sort of how everyone feels about a certain question or comment. With that, please do keep yourself muted until I.
Andrew, you're muted.
There we go. There we go. Are there any questions or comments before we get started? If so, please type into the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So let's take a deep breath and center ourselves. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in the Episcopal Diocese of Washington for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Okay, at this time, we will start with our first resolution on Christ Church Akakix separation. My colleague Kim Vaughn will post the text of the resolution on the screen right now so that it will be visible to everyone. And she will also post a link to the resolution and its explanation in the chat in case you would like to refer to it that way. And with that, I will invite Ethan Bishop Henchman, the primary sponsor of this resolution, to say a few words. Ethan.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ethan Bishop Henchman. I'm a deacon currently serving at St. Paul's K Street. I was ordained in 2020. I think the simplest thing to do right now would be just to read the explanation that our committee came up with for this resolution. I would like to note that I would not be putting forward this resolution if I had not first taken counsel with some of my colleagues, specifically the deacons that serve in Southern Maryland, where Christ Church Akakix resides. I also have one lay delegate sponsor to one lay delegate for diocesan convention that's sponsoring as well. So the explanation. On April 29th, 2021, it was publicly announced the Episcopal Diocese of Washington and Christchurch Akakix reached terms of an amicable separation. Amicable parish departures in the Episcopal Church are rare, especially those involving property. In recent years, more often than not, parties involved have entered into pitched legal battles and messy public spats. Bishop Marianne and the Standing Committee showed exceptional leadership in rising above a situation that all too easily could have devolved into a publicly tense and legally adversarial relationship. While a parish's departure from the church is inherently regrettable, such a deterioration would have caused even greater harm to the body of Christ. Such adversarial departures take place at great financial cost and serve to deepen existing and entrenched divisions. Because the outcome here is so rare in the church, it is important that the diocese as a whole, via this resolution of convention, formally and concretely lift up, affirm, and praise both the substance and form of this separation. If such separations are to happen, then we hope such a resolution will encourage leaders here and elsewhere to follow in these footsteps. And I'll just add that I feel that our diocese has a special place in the life of our denomination. We're often called to lead, and I think we led in this instance, and I hope others will learn from this situation. And I'll pass it back over to Andrew. I welcome comments and questions, and I believe there's a few other deacons who are sponsoring this resolution also on the Zoom with us tonight.
Thank you, Ethan. So we'll now open the floor for questions or comments. If you have something to share, please type into the chat and I'll call on you in order. We are going to leave the text of the resolution up on the screen so that we can refer to it throughout our discussion. So please, chat is open. So there's a question from Pamela Brewer. Thanks, Pamela. She's asking if the Standing Committee is behind this resolution.
I did not formally consult with the Standing Committee, as this is specifically about praising their actions and reinforcing language that I assume Bishop Marianne would have already cleared with them, most likely, maybe not. But it's affirming words that Bishop Marianne has already released publicly, and also endorsing her leadership and the Standing Committee's leadership.
Thank you. Deborah, I see you have a question and comment. Would you like to unmute yourself, please, and speak to us?
Sure. Deborah Sonderman, St. Monica and St. James. I agree that the accomplishment is commendable, but is a resolution by the convention required? Is this the only way that we have to acknowledge? I am a Christian, I am an Episcopalian, but karma life has shown me that when I spend time basking in my accomplishments, something comes along, unfortunately, often too quickly, to help me be humble again. So it's always good to be humble. I think it's fine for the convention members to say things, but I don't know that resolution is required.
Thank you. And I'll give Ethan a chance to respond in just a moment. But did want to point out Jerry Perez's response in the chat that resolutions of good order is common in General Convention, and this follows that format. Thank you for that, Jerry. But Ethan, I know you've thought about this. Would you like to respond?
Deborah, thank you so much for your question. I did check with the diocese to see if there's formal proceedings that will take place at convention that will officially separate us. But again, I feel that it's the leadership of our bishop and our standing committee needs to be lifted up in this formal way. I don't think it's enough for individual delegates of convention to say so. I think it will mean much more to our diocese and the wider church if we as a diocese lift up their leadership in this formal way.
Thank you. And Catherine McKay is asking why Christ Church Akakix seeks to leave the diocese. And first, I would say that they have left, that the separation agreement is concluded, and would say that it was a mutual decision, a prayerful decision, and I think that the people of Christ Church Akakix feel theologically more comfortable outside of the diocese. Anton, I see you have a comment. Would you like to unmute yourself and speak with us?
Thank you very much, Andrew. Anton Vantaboo from Standing Committee. I appreciate the opportunity for this resolution to be presented at Standing Committee. At our diocesan convention. And although I have no vote in the matter, my recommendation as an offering is that we as a Standing Committee were walking hand in hand with our bishop in this effort, but the people who really made a lot of the groundwork happen to make the actual separation legally and financially, as people have been discussing in the chat, happen, were people like Paul Cooney, people like Don Crane, as others as our chancellors over the last couple of years. And I'm just recommending as an offering that they be somewhat recognized in this effort as well. Thank you for the opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you. And thank you. See a raised hand there. Thank you. I see Mary Nesnick has a question in the chat. Mary says, I assume the legal, financial, real estate details are mediated to everyone's satisfaction. And I would say yes, because the agreement, the separation agreement has been signed by both parties. And Gary Hogue is asking, what will come of Christ Church Akakix after the separation? Again, I would point out that the separation has already occurred. And Gary, I'm not sure what their plans or intentions are.
Good evening. This is Gary Hope from St. Thomas's and Croom. I was on the sidelines watching the evolutions 20, 25 years ago, and I remember the issues back then when Paul Cooney, as someone had mentioned earlier on, was involved, and Bishop Dixon, and it was quite tumultuous back then. It sounds like it's much more amicable this time, but I was just curious to know if they're heading towards the Anglican side as that they had wanted to do back then or not.
Yeah,
Over.
thank you. Thank you, Gary. And I can see our bishop is on the call tonight. And in the chat, she's informed us that Christ Church is now affiliated with the Anglican Church of North America. Thank you, Bishop Mary Ann. The floor remains open for further questions or comments. Thank you, Peggy. Peggy's just typed into a chat that some of the members of Christ Church have moved to St. Paul's Piney in Waldorf. Thank you, Peggy. And thank you for welcoming them. I want to be sure that everyone who has a chance to speak to this resolution has the opportunity to do so. So please do type into the chat. I'll give it another minute or two, and then if we don't have any further discussion, we will move on to the next resolution. Right, as Claire is saying, the separation has occurred, an agreement has been reached. What else is there to discuss? We're just discussing the resolution that's been put forward for convention, Clara. Okay, so sensing no further questions or comments, I do want to just give Ethan a minute if there's anything else you want to say to us, Ethan.
Just to say thank you to all of you for joining this evening and taking part in the governance of our church. This isn't the flashiest or most fun things to do, but it is important that we discuss these things in community. I will take everything that was said this evening to heart. And I also want to thank all the other sponsors as well. And thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Ethan. Kim, if you could stop sharing, wonderful. Okay, I think we will move on to our second resolution and discuss that one rather than taking a break because it's only been about 20 minutes or so. So the next resolution is on including the name of Bishop Barbara Harris in Lesser Feasts and Fasts. And I will invite Carol Cole Flanagan. I see Carol on the screen. Carol, if you would unmute yourself and say a few words about this resolution.
I would be happy to. So let me see, what can I say that's not already in it? I first met Barbara Harris around 1980 at a meeting at the Siemens Church Institute in New York. And it was a meeting to plan for the 82 General Convention in New Orleans, which dates us both, I suppose. You probably don't need me to tell you what a sassy and fun person she was. She also, of course, was the first woman elected bishop in the Anglican Communion, and it was particularly nice that she was a woman of color. There are a number of other unusual things about her, but I'm not sure that we need to spend much time on that right now. There's been growing interest in seeing her added to the calendar. So resolutions like this have already been passed in Atlanta, Central New York, Massachusetts, Los Angeles, Vermont, and California that I know of. There may be others, but those are the ones that I know. And there have been occasions when we have required 50 years before someone can be added to the calendar, but some exceptions to that have been made in recent years, in particular for the 79th General Convention, which approved the addition of Thurgood Marshall, Pauline Murray, and Florence Lee Tim Oy. And because this is part of the Book of Common Prayer by extension, it has to be approved by 2 successive general conventions. So if we vote to approve it this time, it will not actually go into effect until 2024. However, a number of parishes have requested permission to use the propers for it that are being proposed and have done so. One of those was Christ Church Rockville, where Meg Ingalls and I are the interim rectors. And so it was very successful. People were glad to participate. And you'll see by the other people who have joined on and proposing it that some of them have had that experience too. I noticed that Sarah, for example, Sarah Motley Fisher was on, so she may want to speak to it. But yes, we're eager to see her added to the calendar. And I'm happy to respond to any questions. I think most of us know that she served in this diocese after her retirement from Massachusetts. She served here from 2004 to 2007, so many people do know her. So open for questions.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, please, if question or comment, type into the chat.
John Harmon.
John Harmon, yes, please.
I just want to encourage, the support of this resolution for all the reasons my sister mentioned earlier, and for Barbara's presence in our diocese, but also for prophetic ministry in the church. She was a pistor in all the positive ways you want to say that, and she blessed us with her life as well.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Thank you. Cameron is typing into the chat. There seems to be a typo in the second sentence of the explanation. And Kim, perhaps you could scroll us down to the explanation that says she died in March of 2000 instead of 2020. Okay. Thank you for that. We can easily correct that in the explanation. Thank you, Cameron.
You realize 200 years from now, it will be 2222. I just thought I'd mention that.
Again, I don't want to prolong conversation if we don't need to dwell on this resolution any further, but I do want to give everyone a chance to speak, anyone who does want to speak. So just another moment. If you have a question or comment, please type into the chat.
Hey, Andrew, I'm sorry, I'm on my bicycle and I can't type into the chat. May I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to light myself up. It's not going to happen. Hi,
And
this is
this is-
Michelle Morgan from St. Mark's Episcopal. I'm always really confused about the difference between Lesser Feasts and Fasts, Cloud of Witnesses, Holy Men, Holy Women. Are we specifically asking to put her on the calendar and then therefore she will be included in all those books? Or am I just being obtuse? And could someone clarify that for me? That would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Carol?
Those books are all supplements to the Book of Common Prayer, so they're considered to be, extensions of the Book of Common Prayer. Holy Women and Holy Men was the most recent version of Lesser Feasts and Fasts, but I think Lesser Feasts and Fasts are still technically what they call that body of supplemental material, I guess you would say.
Thank you, Carol.
The only people that we call saints, because one could wonder why they were lesser. The only people that we call saints are people named in the Bible. So people who have extended the ministry of the church since that time are Lesser Feasts and Fasts.
Thank you. Anton, you would like to add some context to that question? Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you again, Andrew. The main reason why Lesser Feasts and Fasts has come back into the lexicon for the Episcopal Church, Holy Women and Holy Men and the Great Cloud of Witnesses were both identified as experimental, and in a report from the Standing Committee on Liturgy and Music, the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music, Both of those were not deemed canonically available, unlike Lesser Feast and Fast, or another book that has a supplement to the Book of Common Prayer, which is the Book of Occasional Services. So when the Episcopal Church decided to republish Lesser Feast and Fast 2018, that brought in some of the newer honorings that we have put in place. Yet the other two are still available in some form of print, but for canonically available purposes, the book for honoring and celebrating our holy women and holy men, as we tried to impose it in the past, is Lesser Feast and Fast. Thank you, Andrew. Over to you.
Thank you, Anton. Any last questions or comments on this resolution? Okay. Carol, any last words for us?
No, I'm hoping that we will do it. I think I'm feeling enthusiastic about it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Kim, you could stop sharing now. So folks, we've only been at this 30 minutes. We only have one further resolution to discuss. So we're going to continue on. Our final resolution is on the creation of a task force on Black ministries. And Kim, if you would share the text of that resolution on the screen. She has posted a link to the resolution in the chat. And at this point, I will call on Antonio Baxter, who is the sponsor of the resolution. Antonio, if you would please unmute yourself and say a few words about your resolution.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Walter. This is Antonio Baxter. I am currently a deacon placed at Episcopal Church of the Atonement in Washington, D.C., South Washington, D.C. And thank you this evening, Reverend Walter and the Resolution Committee and others who are present to hear on Resolution 3 that will be coming before the Diocesan Convention. And primarily, the premise of this resolution is about the creation of a task force on Black ministries in the Diocese of Washington. And it's tasked primarily to look at how the impact of racism has had some impact on our Black churches in the Diocese of Washington, as well as looking at strategies that Black parishes in the Diocese of Washington can come together and have discussion on in terms of revitalization and particular resources that may be needed. For instance, there may be churches who may have strategies that may be very helpful across the diocese in terms of enhancing worship, and then there may be those who may be better suited at in terms of financial sustainability. So this is an opportunity to have a conversation as a diocese between these Black ministries, to be able to be in conversation with one another and not siloed, but to be able to have a conversation together to come up with solutions to how we best revitalize the Black parishes within the Diocese of Washington. And that's pretty much all I have to, I guess I'll talk about it now. If there are any other questions and comments, I look forward to your input and engaging in the dialogue about this task force.
Thank you, Antonio. Okay, floor is open for questions or comments. Please type into the chat. Text of the resolution is on the screen.
John Harmon.
Hey, John.
I want to encourage support for this because I think that the African American community share a lot in common with each other. And if they are encouraged to be in intentional conversation, there will be much productivity and growth. Actually, there was a time in the Diocese of Washington when this happened informally, and that kind of growth was palpable. The other is that,
John, you muted yourself.
oh,
There you
no,
go.
no, it said the host muted me, so thank you. So, I mean, I just want to support this because I think that it would give us an opportunity to live into what the diocese has approved most recently, regarding Canon 54 in terms of vitality. And it allows these congregations to be in communication with each other, to learn from each other, to grow with each other, and for us to realize that the Black Church is a unique entity within the Episcopal Church, giving its early beginning from the Break Catechism to the Swanee Plans. All of these things have been a heavy burden on these congregations and the formation of clergy within the church. I don't think that this will do any harm. It just might encourage collaboration and support. And hopefully we can learn from each other. And the primary reason, I hope, the primary result will be to grow these churches, especially as we begin to see the diversity that is taking place within our diocese.
Thank you, John. Anne, you have a question about the timeline. Would you please unmute yourself?
Thank you. I was part of the Millennium Development Goal work that the diocese did, and I understand that the fruit of the task force in part is to create a commission, and that needs to happen within a certain timeline. In other words, that the commission can be formed in time for voting next convention. However, this looks like an awfully ambitious timeline for the task force to be able to complete its work by September 1st. And I just wanted to express some concern about that and hopefully get some feedback as to how they hope to accomplish everything they hope to accomplish. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Antonio, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. I guess I looked at that September 1st timeline to be able to at least provide some feedback to the diocese as you would be going into the next convention, if there were any budgetary implications. But I can't say that because it would be premature for me to say that in being that the task force is totally up to whatever recommendations they make. So very good question, but I guess I'm kind of limited being that would be the work of the task force. And I wouldn't want to prematurely speak for them.
Well, I wish them many blessings.
Yeah, thank you. I can see that Carol Cole Flanagan had a question. Carol? Carol, would you like to unmute yourself?
I was wondering if there was a role for Black Episcopalians, or I'm sorry, for non-Black Episcopalians, because it sounded to me as I was reading through it as though all of the work was being put on the shoulders of Black members. So that was my question.
Thank you. Antonio?
Of course, I would assume that there would be a role, being that the task force would make recommendations, and those recommendations would come before the diocesan council, and I would assume at the convention as well. So certainly there would be a role. As to what that is, I couldn't speak to that at this time. I think that's something that would be more developed as the task force met, and then whatever recommendations would be moving forward from that task force. But I would envision that there would be some role.
Thank you. Abbott, I think you have a question.
Just wanted to get some context in regard to the origin of the idea. Have you yet approached the bishop and the standing committee or council about setting up the task force?
I have not approached the standing committee, but I can say I've had some conversation with the UBE, with the Union of Black Episcopalians, some conversation there. And some small conversation with a couple of the regional groups, but no conversation with the standing committee yet. Again, I don't want to prematurely, if this is a successful resolution, I think this really is the work of that commission. So I think it'd be premature to speak for them.
Thank you. Marilyn Jenkins, I think you were next with a question.
Yes, my only question, Antonio, is whether you've really socialized this with the other Black Episcopal churches. I read this for the first time when it came forward for the resolutions, and I didn't know if they had discussions with other Black Episcopal churches, but I haven't had a discussion with you or others about how this might play out.
I have had some discussion with other Black Episcopalian churches. And again, there was an opportunity to engage some with the president of the UBE as well.
Andrew, this is John Harmon. May I add at least one
John,
historical background?
Wait, John, can you hold on for just 1 second? Because there were a couple of other people in front of you who'd like to talk. Gail Epps was next. Gail. Gail, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, I'm sorry. My question is, will there be clergy and lay in the task force?
Antonio?
Yeah, I would envision that, but the diocesan council would appoint who those members would be. But I would envision probably they would have clergy as well as lay members upon that task force as well.
I would think that's true. Ricardo, you wanted to address the group.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm actually one of the co-sponsors on this, and one of the things I want to bring forth is just to add a little bit to what's already said. The timeline. The timeline is necessary to keep everyone on track. We know clearly that if there is no timeline, that this might just keep going and going and going, and nothing happens. So the purpose of the timeline is to keep, at least give us a vision of where we want to get to. Even if we don't get there, we're shooting for the sky, and if we hit the clouds, God, we thank God for the clouds. As far as the coming together and the reaching out to fellow clergy, we have. We might not have gotten everyone, but one of the things about starting a ball rolling is that you can't touch everybody to get the ball rolling. We have to get started, and then starting, begin to bring people aboard and say, okay, let's come together. And that's the reason for having some of these gatherings. Let's come together and recognize that we need to start moving. We've recognized one major piece is that the Black church within the diocese are dying. You can go back and ask and look at the numbers, we're dying. And one of the reasons we recognize is that we need to officially have the support of the diocese and to come together collectively and find a way to make sure that that does not happen.
Thank you, Ricardo.
I'll stop there.
Thank you. And thank you. And Carol Cole Flanagan noted in the chat that diocesan council could be authorized to extend the time if need be. Thank you, Carol. Tom Getman, I think you were next.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. In urban ministries, in which I've been involved in Boston and Washington, I've discovered that it's absolutely essential and a great blessing to have mergers or partnerships with the so-called Black church, or the churches where there's a majority of people of color. And so it raises the question in my mind, when some of us are deeply involved in the Sacred Ground series with theologians and local participants of color, to deepen our social justice engagement. Will part of the plan be to deepen justice partnerships and maybe even mergers? Or is that also too early to anticipate?
Thank you, Tom. Antonio?
I certainly think those are things that can be considered and certainly brought up to be discussed with the task force. But I would myself defer to the diocesan council as they're the ones who are appointing people to this. So I would defer to, some of the recommendations they would make for that. But I certainly think those are plausible things to be added.
Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Ophelia's next, and then John Harmon. Ophelia, if you would please unmute yourself.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. This resolution actually I sent out to our congregation, and I got some interesting comments back and questions. And on last Sunday, we celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday, and we listened to one of his sermons. So this resolution and the questions I'm about to ask really ring home. Is this truly the time for us to be separate instead of inclusive? Given the time, we're trying to be inclusive. I don't know if everyone has read the Church Cracked Open, but it examines our Episcopal faith. It examines our church. And right now, I feel like our diocese we're trying to come together to be one, not separate churches. So I would hope that this doesn't make us feel separate. It hopefully makes us feel more inclusive. And I think that this is the time that we need to be very inclusive, not separate. Not saying that this is not a great idea, but it makes us feel separate. Our communities in the district are ever changing. We have different ethnicities moving in, living together, and most of our churches will soon reflect that. So are we truly going to have any churches that are just Black churches? So I think we need to be careful about that. There is one thing to, talk about the Black churches and the traditions that we've done within the Episcopal Church, but how many of those churches are truly still there? And what does the future hold for them? And then the one question that also came out from our congregation is, will this further insulate the Black churches? Will we insulate ourselves and not live into what God has called us to do? So I think we need to be careful and think about all those things. Think about the long-term impact. Think about where the diocese is going as a whole. And I think we're trying to be more inclusive, and this doesn't feel like we're being inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonio, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the comment observation. I don't think it's necessarily about us being separate. I think it's really about pulling more into community, particularly as, quite frankly, there are a lot of Black churches that are going through issues, and oftentimes they're off to themselves and not communicating with others who may have possible solutions if they engage in conversation. So this is certainly not about separating, but in my opinion, more about collaboration and community.
Thank you, Antonio. John Harmon, you were next.
Thank you again. I wanted to highlight, at least my sister Michelle has given me a springboard. I think there ought to be some clarity around what the Black church is and Black congregation of Black churches. The major congregations conversation going across the country about what constitutes a Black church within the Episcopal Church. One of the things that we are talking about has to do with ethos. For instance, if a congregation in a particular community that was historically Black, in the case of St. Luke's in Washington, D.C. on 15 and P, where the community is changing, can that congregation, even when the complexion has changed, maintain the ethos of a Black congregation, meaning the theology, the way it goes about doing ministry in the community in our urban setting? The other is the fact that since the fact that this congregation are struggling, we need to look at what are the root causes of that struggle, because there's a systemic pandemic in that sense. What it is that have brought about that? Why are these congregations stuck? And to look historically, when these congregations were thriving, what was going on? Within our lifetime, we have seen a decline in some of these congregations. So I think the ability to increase our own diversity, we have to ensure the survival, or at least that these congregations thrive, and that contribution to the larger church should be considered.
Thank you, John. Michelle Morgan, I think you have a question.
Yeah, hi, Michelle Morgan, St. Mark's. Nice indigenous girl here. Not really wanting to speak for my African-American Black brothers and sisters, my siblings. But I'm wondering, because it seems like this is a creation of a task force on Black ministries, which seems to me to be a very broad, open-ended, lovely sort of space that we can create to have a conversation. And I'm seeing Black churches and Black ministries. And I think the Black church is bigger than any of the buildings, in the same way the Episcopal Church is bigger than any of our buildings. And as we are coming to a realization that perhaps the buildings for some of us might be a hindrance rather than a help, I think it's a conversation we need to have. And I'm not saying, I'm just wondering if that's kind of where Antonio and Ricardo are going here. And I just like some clarity. I was going to answer the question I'm asking, but I don't need to. So I'd love to hear from Antonio or Ricardo about that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Antonio or even Ricardo, if you would like to respond.
I was just going to chime in there and say that that's actually a very good point, and certainly something that can be discussed in context of the task force. Far be it from me, we have some very brilliant people in this diocese who I think would have some very good input on that. So I would dare not comment on that, but say that I think we have some great minds that could really engage upon that question that you just asked in that task force.
If I can, I think
yes, please.
That it's a moving forward, right? It's that whole conversation about what it is. It's that conversation of clarity, of us clarifying that as a community, right? As a people, as because we're good on titles, but short on explanations, right? So where do we get to a place where we can even take away the title and begin to look at the systematic problem, look at who are we? Where do we stand? Where are we going? Where the diocese is there support? And I'll say this, get myself in trouble for it, but this isn't even about looking outside for outside help. This is about looking inward and defining who we are and being able to support and lift that community up. And yes, I believe there's a role for everyone in this, but I think sometimes the help begins at home.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thelma, I think you had a question.
Yes, I'm Thelma Trish from St. Columba's, and sorry, excuse me. I don't want to impede in any way the adoption of this resolution, which I have the feeling is quite valuable and useful and necessary. But I wonder whether it needs to be in some way coordinated with the ongoing program that has begun to promote the vitality of churches, all churches in the diocese. And I apologize for my ignorance. I don't know the formal name of that program or commission, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about because we've discussed it quite a bit recently.
Yes,
or perhaps the findings of this task force would inform that other program. But I do somehow feel like there needs to be some coordination.
Right, I think you're talking about all of our revitalization work, perhaps including the Tending Our Soil initiative, our vitality signs, all of that. And Antonio, perhaps you could just speak to how you think all of that work might tie in with what you're proposing in this resolution.
I'm just thinking when you ask that question, I'm thinking about initiatives such as like the rising generation and kind of like you said, tending soil. I certainly think there are components of that that can be included in this work. As to how much and how specifically it's catered for these specific congregations, I guess that would be the work, and it would be the work of the task force to kind of to lay out those goals and those visions. But I certainly think that makes sense.
Thank you. And thank you to Ethan for his comment in the chat, noting the timing of this resolution, and it's coinciding with the upcoming release of Gail Fisher Stewart's book, Black and Episcopalian, The Struggle for Inclusion. Thank you, Ethan. The floor is still open. If there are further questions or comments, we would have about 10 more minutes.
I promise to be my last comment. How's that?
Okay, and I'm going to hold you to it, John.
Thank you.
Please.
So, I think that if you look at the broad history of the Episcopal Church, look at the work of George Bragg, the first to write about our condition, and before that, Alexander Cromer, who wrote broadly about the African-American plight within the country, and then going back to Harold Lewis' work, the key thing has to do with the people of African descent who find themselves in the Episcopal Church. Their plight has to be addressed. And one of the work that African-American congregation has done all along from the work of the Organization of Colored People is the fact that they have worked hard to include, for greater inclusion of this, what we might call suspect class in the life of the Episcopal Church. We have to look at ordination in terms of, as a vocation among African American within the Episcopal Church. So I'm hoping that this task would look broadly in terms of how African American are included in the church, in terms of its leadership, in terms of its own vitality as congregational work, and the way they respond to the community in which they find themselves. Most of these congregations for a while were in very challenging communities. And one of the unique things about these historic churches is that they were related to African-American institutions. For instance, if you mention Howard University, I can name Episcopal churches, Black Episcopal churches. You mentioned Virginia State, I can mention Black Episcopal churches. So we have to look at the way in which these congregations were strategically placed within the life of this country and the impact they have had since the abolition of slavery. And in fact, we have to give much credit to an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Washington, who was the first to write Congress on the abolition of slavery. It is his thought that has given rise to what is now known as the NAACP. So there's much work to be done here with a lot of resources to explore. And finally, the work that the National Church is doing around internalized oppression, how African-American experience within the Episcopal Church has been detrimental to their own growth. That needs to be explored. Thank you so much. I will keep my word.
Thank you, John. And thank you to Dana for your comment in the chat, which relates back to Thelma's question a little bit earlier. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Thank you, Gary. I think, Scott, you have a question?
Yes, I do. First off, thank you, Antonio, for the resolution. I think that collaboration and best practices and community is a great thing, and that the sentiment behind this is very valuable. I know that in a small breakout group in one of the area meetings that I was a part of, the topic of reparations that have been made by the Diocese of Virginia as well as Maryland came up and was raised in that meeting. And my memory is that someone very thoughtfully reported on the work that has been done in this diocese on that topic, and that a report would be coming forward at the convention. And if my memory is correct, and it is not always correct, or at least accurate, I'm wondering how that report, if at all, would inform the work of the task force that you propose.
Thank you,
So
Scott.
there are probably two questions in there.
Yes, I think that's right. But yes, I can confirm that there will be a report from the Reparations Committee at the upcoming diocesan convention. And as far as how that report impacts the work of the task force, I think, as Antonio has said in response to several questions, I think that will be determined by council and the task force itself.
Okay.
Thank you. Any last questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Antonio, would you have any last words for us? And Kim, I think you could stop sharing the thank you, the resolution there.
Unmute myself. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to discuss this resolution tonight. And I think it's critically important, critical as some of our, historically Black parishes, quite frankly, find themselves in some of them in hospice care. I think this resolution is critical to really begin some hard conversations about vitality. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity of community that it will build, not only just among African-American parishes, but as we all seek to work together to revitalize the church, and particularly those churches that have been historic and have been part of the great movement of the Diocese of Washington. I remember there was a great amount of involvement for Black churches, particularly some years ago during the apartheid movement in South Africa. So I think this resolution offers an opportunity to really talk together in community again and, rebuild it and a chance to really enhance the great ministries that we have had in historically Black parishes in the Diocese of Washington. And again, I really thank you for your questions and comments.
Thank you, Antonio. And thanks to everyone for participating tonight. We really appreciate your engagement on these three resolutions. Next Tuesday, January 25th, we will be holding a practice convention for all new and returning delegates. We will walk through the logistics of holding an online convention. Then on Friday night, January 28th, the Friday night of convention, we're holding a special event on reaching rising generations. And then, of course, on Saturday, January 29th, it is the legislative session of convention, including the bishop's address, the report from the Reparations Committee, budget, and all of that. Clergy and lay delegates will be receiving an email in the next day or two with links for participating in all of those events. The practice convention next Tuesday, the Friday night of convention, and the Saturday of convention. If you are a delegate and you don't receive an email in the next day or two, it means we don't have you as a delegate. And so please either contact me or my colleague Kim Vaughn so we could work through that. Thank you all for being here this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next week at the practice convention and then at the Friday night event and Saturday of convention. Thank you all so much.
Andrew, may I have a offline question answered?
Sure, please stay on the call.
Thank you. Thank you very much.